Don't get me wrong, I know Immortan Joe was not a good guy. He clearly was a bad dude. The guy was mean and cruel to the people and showed little regard for the lives of those living under him. But I do think there is an argument to be made that he wasn't as much of a straight-laced, one-dimensional baddie as he's depicted. So where does Joe fit into the story? In Mad Max Fury Road, Joe is the primary antagonist. He's the leader of a city called the Citadel and is clearly on his last legs as he has air hoses attached to a bellow system to help him to breathe. We see him briefly supplying the townspeople who look just as diseased and decayed as Joe and his sons do, with the water before quickly shutting off the supplies. He sends his commander Imperator Furiosa off to Gastown to collect gas in a war rig, but is betrayed by her as she instead makes off with the rig into the distance and, as he later finds out, she's also kidnapped, or rescued, his 5 wives. Now it's heavily implied that the wives were sexually abused by Joe and they take great pleasure in making an escape from him. The primary reason Joe needs the wives is because it seems that they are a rarity in this world and that they are fit and healthy and thus would make appropriate sons for Joe. Looking at it from the feminist angle, you can see it as a critique of the idea that a woman's purpose is simply just to make children. Now Joe is a straight up bad guy in the movie, the plot of which revolves around him trying to get back his wives and Furiosa attempting to outrun him and his crew. Now as stated, this man seems to feel nothing seeing the sorry state of those living under him. He's a tyrannical dictator, a mad, bad man. But is it reasonable to suggest that possibly, in this mad, bad world, that's the kind of person it takes to take hold of and maintain order? After all, this is not our world the characters are living in. This is a world where niceties are left at the opening credits and only the fittest, hardest and ugliest survive. Joe may have caused many deaths, but it could be argued that through his maintaining of a social structure and law and order of sorts, he may have also prevented a few deaths. Whether or not he established this economy is a different story. I haven't read the comics and I'm only going off the movie. But either way, this system he has seems to be working. Is the water from the Citadel coming from a limited source? If so, didn't Furiosa essentially cause havoc at the end of the film by opening the taps up? However cruel this dictatorship was, it's one of the few examples of a proper society we've seen in the Mad Max world. In terms of the future, it could be argued that he's trying to keep humanity going, or it could be said that Immortan Joe is concerned with his own legacy and running of the Citadel, thus his need for a son that isn't deformed or stupid like the rest of his family. Once he goes, none of the remaining members of the family will be able to maintain the Citadel and there will be an uprising, scattering and division of power. We've seen real-life examples of this happening only recently within the last 20 years or so, and it definitely turned out for the worse. So even though the intention may have been selfish, the act of seeking out an heir was a mission worth taking. There are many who have suffered under Joe, but there are also those who would have suffered greatly if he wasn't there. The wives, for instance, they are shown to be healthy with the ability to procreate, and they waste water, which shows us they did not want for it under Joe. Of course they had it tough in many ways, but they also had it easy in others. It's important to remember this story is not taking place in 21st century America, but a dystopian wasteland where food and water are considered privileges, and man has regressed into beasts, putting their primal instincts first and foremost and taking without asking. In this kind of world, can it not be argued that the wives had it easy, comparatively? They may have been unhappy with who they were with, but the alternative was being below down with the lower class of people, and who knows what would have happened to them there. Is being with a fat, ugly bastard worth it in exchange for a life of luxury in other departments? There are queens who have done this very thing. Joe demands that not a scratch is to be made on them, and seems to show genuine remorse when one of them dies. And in terms of what he wants from them, again, it could be a selfish thing, or they could be part of a greater vision of his, healthy, radiation-free race of people. His true legacy. By our society's standards, he is as despicable as they come, but in the Mad Max world, I think we've seen a lot worse. Either way, I like the idea that both parties, the protagonist and the antagonist, had genuine reasons for doing what they were doing. Unlike, say, Humongous from the second movie, who opted to raid the refinery tribe instead of making a deal. Toe Cutter in the first movie, who murdered and raped for no reason. Joe does things that are considered evil by our standards, but there were reasons for doing those things. The wives would give him healthy heirs and future leaders, the milkers supplied the milk, he grew crops and educated a society of warboys. That may have been a deranged, extremist and suicidal death cult of a society, but a society nonetheless. and one that could be directed in any way Joe pointed his fingers, and if those fingers were pointing at outsiders coming to try and steal the water supplies, he'd now have soldiers willing and able to protect it. The city is safe from outsiders with him on the throne. He provides clean water but sparingly, reminding the people that it is a scarce resource, and he has organized trade with other cities. It's far more than you'd expect in a world where chaos and disorder are the norm. Cometh the hour, cometh the man, as they say, and this was just the hour for a man like Joe. His running of a community in a world as brutal and ruthless as this is a great feat. Looking at the other end, Furiosa's beef with Joe seems to be personal. She rescues those who are most well off but leaves those who are hungry and thirsty. She's taking them from where we have to admit they are safe and not in need of food, water or shelter, and on a road trip to a shattered vision. There is no green place, only a band of ragtag elderly bandits and marauders who they team up with. One by one, even Mad Max himself see that there is no logic in Furiosa's plan, and they turn back to the only beacon of civilization they know, Joe's civilization. She loses her moral high ground when she essentially stages a coup. Joe dies and she takes over, but what evidence is there that she will be any better than him? Joe was resourceful and a provider, whereas Furiosa only had her bitterness and her anger to drive her. Would she be able to lead the Citadel forward? What happens when the taps run out? What happens when the milk dries up? What happens when people are dying of disease and all the healthy men and women refuse to be breeders? But anyway, I'm not trying to convince you that he's a hero or anything, he's far from it. These were just some random thoughts that were swimming in my head. If this guy existed in real life, he should be hunted down and ended, but in this world where humans have been stretched to the brink of insanity and beyond, I like toying with the idea that Immortan Joe is not a clear-cut bad guy as originally depicted in Fury Road.